Hi everyone, my name is Sumit Verlekar. I'm the founder of Trident Global Education Mentors. We are a premier admissions consulting firm based out of major cities in the world. I have with us today Paras Gupta, who's a proud admit into both two of the most prestigious business schools in the world, the Chicago Booth, as well as Columbia Business School, right? So we are here to find out more about his journey and have him deliver his authentic story and what the process that he went through. So that's something that we are super excited about, Paras. Paras, welcome.
Thank you so much, Sumit, for having me.
Absolutely. The pleasure is all mine. So let's start with the very basics, right? So maybe you could provide to our viewers, Paras, an idea of who you are.
Yeah. My name is Paras Gupta, and I'm originally from Panipat in India. I think the best way to look at my story is mostly been away from Panipat. So I never say that I am from Panipat, India. I did about 12 years of boarding school while I was in India. And then immediately after that, I joined University of Warwick and I studied civil engineering there for my undergrad. I think the process of civil engineering told me that it was not meant for me. And I said, I want to pivot. And that's when I joined London Business School in their Masters in Analytics and Management program here. And that's what I'm completing now. And soon I'll be joining a consulting firm, Carney in the Middle East, and then exploring how consulting and data science can help businesses. And so that's sort of a very quick snapshot into who I am.
Right. So then, so let's kind of think about this, guys, right? So we are talking about someone who has pursued engineering and then has explored the area of analytics as well. So what has prompted you, Paras, to consider this particular program, which is the MBA program? And could you let us understand, right? What are some of the factors or what are some of the experiences that led you to think that MBA, yeah, this is MBA is what I'm supposed to do and that is what I'm meant to do in that sense. Yeah. So please share that, please.
Sort of, if I was to summarize all my thoughts into three key buckets, I would look at one as exposure. My time at Warwick and then, enhanced at LBS told me something very clearly that when you are in institutions which are, teaching you a certain subject area, it's more than that subject area. It's a lot more about exposure. Like, I met a lot of people at LBS coming from different industries, and the ecosystem in general at a B school was a huge exposure, traveling around with people, meeting clients, meeting customers, meeting different organizations. So as a whole, one thing that was very clear to me is that I look at my career as getting more and more exposure, and MBA seems to be that one huge packet all bundled together in 2 years. So that's one very clear reason for me. Two was my interactions while I was doing internships with people who had done MBA. And I think what I really understood them from was MBA gives you a certain toolkit, which just makes your ability to make decisions a lot more stronger. Maybe that's because of the academic rigor, maybe that's because of the people you meet, the network you make, and that's also the general exposure I talked about. So my interactions so far led me to believe that to be able to progress in the career as a way I want, I think just being able to make decisions better would help. And the third is that my next step was to join consulting, which is something that I always planned to do for the past 2.5, 3 years. And I felt like in the long term, that's not something that I might want to do. I might want to be an investor at some point, or I might want to be somebody who wants to start a startup. And my education so far was analytical, civil engineering focus. And I think obviously we all know investor needs a lot of more skill set. A startup person needs a lot more skill sets. So I always looked at MBA also as an opportunity to bridge that skill set. And I think the ability to have exposure, skill sets, as well as ability to make decisions, kind of always propelled me to want to do an MBA. And
Awesome.
and I think that's basically around it.
Great. So the program that Paras applied was a deferred MBA program. It is basically a pathway to the full-time MBA program, and it's a pathway that allows final year college students to get a seat or block a seat rather in the full-time MBA program. So in your own words, right? Could you share what this pathway is and how you went about choosing this particular route to apply to your MBA program.
Yeah, I think from a very student perspective, so as to say, what I wanted to do was I already had given a GMAT. And so I had a score that I thought was competitive. The other thing was I had already secured a sort of job very early on in my year. So I knew that I had time to explore opportunities, and I was very sure that I wanted to do an MBA. So a bit of research led me to find deferred MBA as an opportunity to get there today, then later while I'm working. So a very student perspective answer was that. But there was a second aspect to it, which is something I realized while I started working towards it, is your opportunity to connect with people and your opportunity to be have the ability to take a bit more risk at a comfort. And what I mean by that is I'm going into a consulting shop, but I'm also changing my region to Middle East. And by the fact that I'm able to do deferred MBA, there is peace of mind that even though things don't work personally that great for me, 2 years or 3 years down the line, I can shift to US. So as I graduate today, I go out with an opportunity to take additional risk. Even if it's not risk, anything that I feel could be a risk can be comforted by the fact that I have an MBA that I anyway wanted to do. So that's basically the thought around why I started exploring deferred MBA and what I learned about it in the process.
Okay. So I think the first thing that is the most common question that I and my team get every year worldwide, and this is just not any specific country phenomenon, right? It's a worldwide phenomenon where you're getting people across different countries and asking the same question, right? If I apply, do I have a chance? Or is my profile good enough, right? And I'm sure that, Paras, you would have also at some point in time asked yourself similar questions, and now you've been through the process, right? If you could maybe help us understand how did you really answer these $1 million questions about am I good enough and is my profile good enough? Yeah. So, yeah, over to you.
That's I have not questioned that. I've questioned that every day, and it's so to the audience at large. I want to say that it's a daunting experience to apply, but it's an experience to have. And so, if you were to ask me how I figured out whether I fit into that competitive pool, whether I have a chance, I can give you basically three answers. Right, one is a very practical answer which students can do is literally go to LinkedIn, search of people who went into these colleges through these programs, read their profile, and try and get an understanding of what these colleges want. Go to their websites and read about these programs. And I think that gives you a very good idea about what these programs want. And then you have to be very honest with yourself. And I can tell you with honesty that there were a lot of programs that I looked at and I ruled them out simply because I was not the profile they wanted. Does that mean that I'm not good enough for them? It's not a conversation, it's more about the profile. So, one is go to LinkedIn, go to these websites, read the students that have gotten in, what's their trajectory like so far, and kind of get a ballpark estimate. That's the more practical way to go about it. Second is, I mean, Sumit has been great with this, Tilden has been great with this, is to be able to get a very good, realistic understanding from somebody who was an expert at it, right? They, I mean, they have been in the industry far longer than you have. And so their understanding of the program is far better. So getting an expert opinion. And then the third for me is the more philosophical side of decision making is the thought in my mind was you always have a chance simply because the way I attended some of the seminars of these colleges was that they're looking for a holistic profile and anything in your profile can take off immediately. And so my hope and the always thought was that something can take off and that can go in my favor. So you can go the more realistic pathway and then really get down to the answer and then be able to calculate it, or you can go towards the more philosophical side and say, right, if there is a chance I can go for it. So it depends on your ability to take risk and the amount of time you have. These are time consuming process.
Well, I think that was something that is a very structured way, right? You guys can see that Paras is for the right reasons joining a consulting firm. So his answer was like super structured. So awesome, great job there, done there, Paras. Just purely from your own profile perspective, right? if you could now kind of look at your own profile, right, and tell them, with maybe some specific examples, if how you evaluated your own profile. Like obviously you've laid down the structure, but if it is possible, again, not to put you under a spot here, and please don't answer this if you're not comfortable, but if you can, right, you've introduced yourself to them in the beginning of this video, and now the question is, how did you decide if your profile was good enough, or if you had a chance, right? So yeah, take a
I
go
can go,
go
yeah,
for it. Go for it.
I can give a stab at it. Like very concretely, this is how I looked at it. I looked at my GMAT and said that it was competitive enough. Comparing it to the average GMATs across colleges plus 20. That's
Right.
my straight answer. That I said the average GMAT plus 20, GMAT is competitive enough. Academically, I felt like I was kind of very fortunate to have done really well in my undergrad. I was ranked best, like I ranked the highest first position in civil engineering at University of Warwick, and I also got the best civil engineering award at University of Warwick. So I felt that in the degree that I'd opted for, I had done comparatively well. And then I joined London Business School, which to me was a brand that I could take forward to my application, and it's something that adds value to the kind of education I get. So from the education perspective, that's how I looked at it. So education, GMAT, and then the third one is the career perspective. Very concretely, all LinkedIn profiles I went through, people who were either going into startups, or people who start not going into startups had built startups that were funded, or who were going into multinational companies which have huge kind of base, have a reputation of getting in competitively and being able to train very well there. So what I'm talking about in simple terms is private equity, investment banking, consulting. I'm not saying that's the only ones, but those were the ones that came repeatedly through. And again, I was quite fortunate to have done internships in consulting multiple times. I had converted those internships. I had some experience with startups. I'd done an investment banking internship, and I was going into a consulting. So more or less that was a tick box. And so when I had three tick boxes in front of me, I said maybe it's worth going for it. And also you'll realize when you do your own research, not every college is looking for all that same three tick box. And I can guarantee you that some of the best colleges are actually looking for something very different. So it's just a sense of, do you have a tick or not, and then you can take your chances with it.
So there you guys have it, right? It's like fantastic job. But yeah, those are very, very objective ways that you could, talk about it. And as Paras rightly said, I mean, those are not the be all and end all of the different parameters that you can really look at. I mean, let me tell you, like for example, in last year's cohort, there was somebody who came from a family business background, right? Obviously, it's not a very small business, it's a fairly well established regional or national business, right? So those kind of profiles have been quite successful as well. There are people who have, worked with large Indian corporates as well, uh, uh, with some significant contributions as well. So if you have not worked with some of these multinational companies, I wouldn't say completely despair, right? Obviously, you want to try and get different experiences which are more germane to what you want to do in the future, for sure. And I think that could be a good yardstick, right, to look at, as well as some of the. So yeah, I was just trying to add a bit more to what Paras already said, right? So let's kind of move on, right, Paras, and talk about, now that you had evaluated your own profile, um, very quickly, right? Were there any apprehensions or challenges you had about applying?
No, definitely. So I think I had some experience applying to a business school, but very quickly put forward the biggest apprehension for me was, how do you think while applying to a business school? Because they are going to ask you questions like, what's your long term goal? What's your short term goal? And to every 20-year-old or 21-year-old sitting there right now, you
Yeah,
don't know what 10 years from now is looking at, what
absolutely.
5 years from now is looking at. So
Yes.
that was the biggest challenge, right?
Mhm.
What am I supposed to tell them when they ask me, what is your long term goal? Because in my mind, it was okay, I'm doing consulting. I might want to be an investor or go into startups. And so, how do you break that down? And that's basically the biggest challenge, I think.
Awesome. So let's talk about the process now, shall we? Right. So now Paras is joined, and we're kind of get going. So he will take you. I'll request Paras you to maybe like obviously it's a very long process. So the process and Paras, I don't want to take words out of your mouth. I just want you to kind of share it from your perspective, right? But yeah, talk the length of the process and the the different things that you've done. So yeah,
Yeah.
why don't you take it away again?
So I think like looking at the process holistically, just a step back, the way I look at process now that it is done, it is an 80-20 rule. The 20% of the things that you actually submit to the college require 80% thinking before that. And what I mean by that is whenever you go to a college website and they'll tell you write 2 essays, you have to submit a recommendation, you have to submit a resume, you'll have an interview, and so on and so forth. It requires, if it requires 20% of the time to write those, it requires 80% of the time to think about those. And I think that's the most important thing about this process. So the first thing you do as soon as you get it is the biggest challenge. Why are you applying? What are you telling them is your short and long term goal? And who are you? And as simple as these three sound, writing all of them consistently well in a convincing manner, which is realistic, is probably the hardest part of the task. And somebody who's 21-year-old or 20-year-old who has no experience of the real world, it's just a notch higher. So I think that's where sort of Sumit, I'm really grateful to you and your team
Thank you.
is to give me that actual insight and understanding of what is it that means to set a long-term goal, what is it that means to set a short-term goal, and what is the adcom looking at, right? I can sit here and say, and I think everyone who's applying is ambitious enough to say that I would like to make the next billion-dollar company. And that's not the answer that adcom is looking for. I mean, I'm great if you do it, but that's not convincing enough. So the first task was to build that story, which I will be able to tell to all the colleges as to who I am. But it's not just telling a story that you can put in great words. It's also having the confidence and the data points to back that story. So with Sumit and the team, I was able to look back at all my past events that I've done, internships, projects, group work, interactions, and things that I'm interested in, things I read about, and start on a board and I say, what are the common themes? What is it that I am interested in? What is it that the world would want next 10 years from now? What's important? And so I can talk about my story in depth, but essentially, I was able to say, I'm going into consulting, and that's going to help me build a bunch of stuff. I want to then specialize into something related to sustainability, which I narrowed down later. And through the college, I can go into the industry. Consulting does not have a lot of quantitative stuff. MBA helps with the quantitative stuff. And I go into the industry in roles that require people to have financial skills. And then after that, build my own company. So, sort of now I had narrowed down skills I will get, skills I will need, how MBA fits in, what I do immediately after MBA, and then what I do long term, all backed by my experiences. So that's step one, right? You have to get all these facts about your story correct. It takes 80% of your time. It took me a lot less just because of Sumit and his team to have told me that Paras, let's be a bit realistic, right? Everyone's ambitious, but what actually is the ground reality? And that was the first step, I think, right? So really bringing down everything on paper was the first step. And the next step then is narrowing down the colleges you want to apply to, which is everyone's personal choice. I think you can look at everything else. You can look at your research. You can look at how ambitious your risk-taking appetite is. For me, it was much more easier working with Sumit simply because I was able to get a sense of what is it needed per college and how they differentiate themselves. So that was the second step. And then the next step was picking up each college one by one based on any priority that you like and starting on that essay. And no matter if you were a Shakespeare at writing, your first draft is never going to be good. And if I look back at my first draft, it was not good at all. And so you go through your first draft, second draft, draft after draft, really analyzing each word And in cases when Sumit wrote back to me saying, analyze the entire paragraph, because that's the way it's supposed to be written. It's structured writing in a convincing way, and it's not all flowery. So you're not supposed to be writing the next thesis, but you're going to be speaking in a very convincing way. And I think that's, again, Sumit, I'm going to keep thanking you again and again, but that's where I think I got a lot of support from you and the team, is to really get an objective opinion on that. And I'll take a step back here and say, students get attached to their story. So they think that their story is unique, that their story is the best story that there is, rightly so, and hopefully that is the case. But it's very much that your story and your emotions are connected. Objectively looking at it can also be a very good aspect, which is what you brought to me. And really saying, right, you've written you want to do XYZ. Does that really make sense? Is it actually practical? Okay, you want to do this, but you have not said how. Or you want to do this and there is no need to do this. So answering those practical questions, which I think comes with your experience and the team's experience, is what was most helpful in writing essays. And so then you go through all your essays college by college, find recommenders, make a resume, and I can go in details of any of these, but make a resume and fill in those applications and then relax, because after that it's on them to decide whether they're fortunate to have you or not, and then get through the interview basically.
Yeah, I love the ending where you said that, you've done your best and then you kind of relax and let them decide if they are fortunate to take you. And I absolutely love that attitude. And I've mentioned this many a times to you, Paras, right? I feel the key thing is to really also try and enjoy the process, as stressful as it may. And this process is starkly similar to what we follow in the full-time MBA program, because the questions are almost identical, if at all. For a lot of schools, the only thing that you have in the full time is you have your work experience, right, which kicks in 3-4 years of work experience after your graduation. But yeah, I mean the approach there is quite different. But we're not going to digress there. But yeah, I mean I think it's important to have this whole idea about enjoying this particular process, just giving it your 100%, and then waiting for the results to unfold. If you've done all your basics correct, and if you've kind of done a lot of fundamentals, if you've kind of followed specific steps, if you've taken the feedback, really thought about it, and try to do well, you know there's a huge chance you will actually be successful in what you aspire to do, which is in Paras's case has resulted in two amazing admits. So let's talk about after the application process, after you submit the applications, what happens is for a lot of MBA programs, there's also an interview involved, right? So maybe spend maybe a minute to talk about your interview experiences without obviously divulging the school name or the interviewer name. But how did you prepare for it, and how was the experience in the actual interview as compared to your prep, right? And then maybe yeah, any humorous or funny situations are always welcome in your answers.
I think on I think the biggest takeaway is that it's a conversation but not a conversation. And so thank you, Sumit, for in my prep telling me that you need to be structured, right? You need to convey your points in a structured manner. My experience was very, very comfortable. There's nobody who's there to grill you. There is nobody who's there to test you. They just want to get to know you. And so that's the premise. All, at least for the colleges I interviewed with, all they wanted to do was get to know me. And they have a bunch of very basic questions where they ask you about your leadership style, ask your previous experiences, and ask your motivations. I think I was very fortunate to have worked with you to understand how to tackle such questions, in the sense that it's they want to know that, but how do you convey that? And I think that's the tricky part where people kind of get caught in, is to how do you convey what is your leadership style? And I think that's the key aspect. So just to a quick conclusion, it's an interview getting to know about you. It's a conversation but not a conversation, where the way you convey the simplest things is what that matters.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that. And thanks for the kind words. Just wanted to talk about overall um, when you look back at this entire process, right? How long did the entire process last for you?
That's a very, very interesting. So I started thinking about deferred MBA, I think a year and a half from now. So 1.5 year before I started thinking about it, I got in touch with you. Actively, I've been working on it for a year. So very actively, I knew that I needed to get a job that was competitive enough to get into
Hmm.
deferred MBA. That's step one. So very
Hmm.
actively, I've been working on it a year. And very actively, just on the application, I've been working since November. So I think if somebody wants like the time commitment, November onwards, I was spending about 3 hours a day doing deferred MBA work
Hmm.
up to my applications getting submitted. So that's a very concrete answer to anybody who wants to understand if they have the time to do it or not.
Awesome, great. So if you look back at your overall experience, what were some of your key learnings, or what key learnings is one, of course, Paras, but also if you were to redo this again, right, what would you do differently?
I think so. I'll start with key learnings because the one that is the most important is my recommendation to everyone, regardless of all the statistics behind chances, all the thoughts behind whether you get in or not, is to go through the process. Because once you've gone through the process, your biggest asset is not going to be the fact that you have an offer. Your biggest asset is that you now have a framework or a way of thinking about your career, the way that you've never thought about it before. And probably after that, my conversations with people have really enriched because I'm able to understand how to think about a career in a much more stronger way, which is backed by data, which is backed by an understanding of the industry and the realities of life. So that's the biggest asset, not the admit, but the way you start understanding your career. I think that's what I would take away. Obviously, when I look back, there's a bunch of things that I should have done in a better way. Uh, Sometimes I think I should have started early, uh, but I'm not sure whether that was my biggest weakness in the process or something I could have worked on. One thing I definitely should have worked on a lot more is trying to understand more about the MBA as a whole. So I understood each of the colleges quite well and the differences between colleges. I think somewhere I did not understand, and maybe I didn't have the experience to understand what it means to do an MBA. So a lot of my thoughts and my analysis was around, right, I will take XYZ course, I will get to meet XYZ professor, I will do this fellowship. But you, to be honest, if you talk to anybody who's done an MBA, that's not what's the biggest takeaway. The biggest takeaway is either a network they formed or an experience they had on a global trip or something they got an exposure through to a conference. So there was a disconnect in understanding why people do an MBA and actually people who are doing an MBA, how experience turns out to be. And I think that only comes with experience, I guess. So I think that was my biggest weakness in the application. Had I spent a bit more time understanding the MBA as a program in more depth, my applications would be a bit more stronger because I would be hinting at different other aspects of my story. So that I think would be my biggest weakness.
Excellent, excellent insight, and something to lock away for all of you guys when you're researching schools, right? That this also talks about the way you, for example, the kind of questions you ask maybe the people who are pursuing an MBA, and then potentially aiming or repurposing your research, right, to be able to discover some of those things. So fantastic insight. Anything you would do differently?
Anything I would do differently? I think a lot of thanks, and again thanks to you and your team, a lot of the guidance that you'd given to connect with people, talk, attend admission officers, talk to people who are studying there, talk to students who have gone to the industries we want to go to after doing MBAs from there,
Mm.
has been really helpful. So that actually has really helped me throughout. If I was to do anything more differently, I think I would have been a bit more authentic. I think there were aspects of myself which I did not recognize till very, very late in the process. And I can, a simple example of that is not everybody can say that they lived away from home for 12 years of their life since the age of 9, right? And that's an aspect of me that has shaped me into somebody who's used to be a bit more independent, make decisions quite automatically from a very young age. I think I never talked about it sufficient into how it helped me grow, but rather got into that circle of, yes, I worked at this big MNC international company. I converted my job. What did I do right? So if I was to do something very differently, I would really add some aspects of my story, which I only recognize later in the process, into my essays rather than just going into my experiences.
Awesome, of course. No, personally, again, I think you did extremely well in your essays. Obviously, but yes, there are certain schools where you don't have like a lack of limit, right? One of the key things that which you're constrained by is the word limit, right?
Yeah.
So there's always obviously there's only so much that you can talk about yourself, but I think that's an excellent point. And what I really like about that specific point, Paras, is it also it emphasizes the need to really introspect about yourself in much more detail and try and you know arrive at some of these unique facets about yourself, like themes about your life, right? Which potentially can play a very important role in your application process. So that's awesome. So my final question is, what advice do you have for future applicants?
Um, I think apart from everything that I've said, uh, I think my biggest advice to all students is, do not look at it like a checklist. Do not look at this process like you have to do it and it's a do or die. Do not get stressed, but rather start with an excitement that this is an opportunity for you to get somewhere that you want to get. Start with an excitement and get really engrossed in yourself. Write about yourself, journal about yourself, think about yourself, and really get engrossed in yourself. And then don't worry about the outcome. Because if you do this process right, I feel the outcome is going to be negligible to the reflection you do in the process. So keep calm, as cliche as it is, keep calm, get really engrossed in the process, and I think get engrossed in yourself. And the more you are in yourself, the better this process is going to turn out to be.
Excellent, excellent way to be able to end this particular call. So yeah, I think with that, I would say that I'm so glad that we had this conversation, Paras. I think for me, right, having been a part of this process and having driven this for some time, every time when I have these conversations with you guys, you also kind of get to understand a bit more, right, about what we could do to potentially improve things, right? And that is something that is I'm deeply appreciative of, a lot of the things that you shared, which will help me and also help a lot of our viewers today to really look at the entire process with a very, very, using their own unique perspectives and
Yeah.
experiences in life. So that's one big takeaway for me. In case you guys are wondering, how do you get in touch with Paras? Paras, do you want to tell them if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way of doing so?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn is the way to go. I think I'm mostly active on LinkedIn. And I'm happy to help anybody who wants to get in touch. Honestly, like
Awesome.
I think Sumit has always professed this to me, that people who got into MBAs have helped me get in, and I'm very much happy to help anybody who wants to get in touch.
Awesome. So that there you have, right? So for Paras, obviously LinkedIn is the way to go. If you want to get in touch with me or the Tilden team, you can visit our website. You can see the logo behind me. It's www.tilden.in. That's our website. You can also reach out to the support team, which is connect, CONNECT @tilden.in, which is the support team, and they will give you all the information that you need to be able to make a decision for sure. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. I certainly enjoyed a lot conversing with Paras today. So yeah, all the best to all of you guys and all the best to you, Paras, for your future.
Thank you so much, Sumit, and all the best to everyone. And Sumit, thank you so much. I can never kind of get over the fact the amount of support you have given. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Have a good one. Bye bye.